I think most Americans, if they were sitting right in my seat right now, would say, right after that, we saw Democrats and Republicans, and for that matter, the President of the United States say we have to do something about this gun problem. Where is it now?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's really important, and I think speaks to everything that's happened, the fact that we're having this conversation on Bloomberg. There has been an enormous amount that's happened starting outside of Congress and state capitals. If you look at the decisions by more than a dozen companies to separate themselves from the gun lobby, the fact that BlackRock now has gun-free ETFs, there are major institutional investors who are now looking at ways to screen out gun companies and create products that would respond to this desire that people have to no longer associate with those who are producing these weapons. That's an important step. Congress has not followed suit yet. But all of the things that we've seen, the decision by Dick's, the announcements by Citi and Bank of America about how they're going to interact with customers based on the way they address gun sales, these are enormous steps forward that never would have happened, I would argue, were it not for the leadership of the student survivors of Stoneman Douglas. This has already happened. Elected officials are going to have to respond to this pressure, and I'm confident that they ultimately will have no choice but to.
Well, is that the response from elected officials? Or, on the other hand, can they sit back and say, look, the private sector can take care of it?
No, I don't think that's true at all. If you look at Look, the NRA is going into a meeting. It's the first meeting they've had since Stoneman Douglas tore a hole out of the heart of our community. It's the first meeting that they've had since the worst mass shooting in American history that took place in Las Vegas, with 58 people killed and close to 600 injured. And what we found, what we know going into this meeting, is that even the majority, the overwhelming majority of members of the NRA feel alienated by this elitist, lobbyist-led organization that is now responding to the gun companies first and foremost, rather than their members. They're feeling alienated. There is pressure from the outside. Ultimately, the way you break the stranglehold in Congress is for members of Congress to know that there are so many single-issue voters who have been created since Stoneman Douglas around the issue of gun safety. If you cannot support these efforts to make our community safer, then these voters won't support you. That's how things are going to change.
And yet the NRA raking in record amounts of money after the shooting, and they come from small amounts of donations from their members, which does not compare to gun control groups. So why is this happening?
Well, that's they get small contributions, and I would put the grassroots army of moms and students and everyone who has been so inspired to take action since the horrific shooting at Stoneman Douglas up against anyone. The fact is that the gun manufacturers contribute millions of dollars directly to the NRA. They contribute millions more in advertising. Some contribute a portion of every sale to the NRA. The decisions being made by the leaders, the lobbyists who run the NRA, are decisions that keep the profits of the gun makers first and only. That's what they care about. The American people want communities that they feel safe sending their kids to school and knowing that they're going to come home at the end of the day. You've seen action taken in the private sector. You've seen action in some state capitals. Congress is going to have to act as well. And the overwhelming majority of people in this country, more than 90%, over 80% of NRA members, think that we need to have universal background checks. There is simply no argument against that unless the only thing you care about are profits of gun companies.
Congressman, there are reports that the FBI is investigating connections between the Kremlin and money being funneled to the NRA. I believe that you're actually calling on the Treasury Department to investigate one company that could have made deals that infringed on sanctions on Russian arms makers. Tell us a little bit more about this, and should we be concerned about those connections?
Sure. Well, sure we should, and there are a couple of things that we're trying to do. One is I have asked whether the Kalashnikov company that is based in Florida might be violating sanctions law because of the relationship that they have with their Russian company. We don't know yet, but I have asked for an investigation to determine if that's the case, and I've asked for a full briefing so that we understand what's happening with this Russian connection. Likewise, I've also asked for hearings in 2 House committees that ought to be looking at the fact that contributions were made to the NRA by Russian figures. We don't know the details of those contributions or of those individuals. And the last thing I point out, the reason this is also concerning is because our campaign finance laws allow so much money to pass through, dark money that isn't accounted for. If we know that there is some Russian money that has come through the NRA in the form of contributions, we need to fully explore in a congressional hearing what might have happened, how much money was there, and how much more there might have been that could have been used to impact our elections. All of this should be concerning, but all of this speaks to the broad alienation that legitimate gun owners feel toward these elitist lobbyists who now run the NRA on behalf of these gun companies.
Congressman, in conclusion, I want to come back to the President of the United States. We all remember that video where he was in the White House in a meeting with members of Congress, dressing them down for being afraid of the NRA, saying they need to stand up to the NRA because he wanted this gun legislation done. Where is the administration now? Is that moving forward at all? What happened?
Well, I can't tell you what happened, but I can tell you I sat just a couple of seats away from the president when he looked at my colleagues and said, you know what the problem is? The reason that we don't have universal background checks, the reason that we can't raise the age to 21 to buy a gun, the reason that we don't keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, all things that the president said he supported. He said the problem is you are petrified of the NRA. You shouldn't be petrified of the NRA. I hope the president remembers that when he speaks to the NRA today. He shouldn't be petrified of them. He should stand with the broad, overwhelming majority of American people who want us to take action on common sense gun safety measures. He said he was supportive of those. He should remind the NRA that they are standing on the extremes. We have to work together to help keep our communities safe.
So Congress did pass the omnibus bill that did include a couple of minor regulations on guns. Anything else that's coming down the pipeline?
Sure. The omnibus included the Stop School Violence Act, a bill that I introduced actually long before the school shooting at Stoneman Douglas. It will help identify potential threats. We passed a couple of other smaller measures. We have to keep going. When I go back to Washington next week, we're going to introduce bipartisan legislation to create gun violence restraining orders, like the ones that they have in Indiana that have been so effective, that were passed in Indiana with a Republican legislature and governor. This is the kind of bipartisan effort that we need to pass before the end of this Congress. And I've also introduced bipartisan measure to raise the age to purchase a gun to 21. Again, showing this isn't a partisan issue. There are Democrats and Republicans who all agree that we need basic common sense gun safety measures. We should be able to work together and push aside those extremists, whoever they are, in order to achieve something that can help keep our communities safe.
Didn't the NRA sue Florida over that age limit being raised?
Sure they did. Sure they did. But again, remember, if the sole purpose of your organization, the people who run this organization, is to represent the interests of and the bottom line of gun manufacturers, then you're going to take every action that you can to try to help them maximize profits. It's no surprise that they sued. We shouldn't be surprised at all. It has nothing to do with anyone's rights. It has everything to do with the gun companies' profits. That's why so many NRA members are alienated. I met with two, just in the past 12 hours, 2 NRA members. Someone came up to me and said, Congressman, I am a lifetime NRA member. You're doing the right thing. We need to take common sense action. He's right, and he's not unusual. That's what people need to remember, and we need to work together, all of us, right, left, whether we're NRA members or not, stand together to help keep our communities safe. What happens at the NRA convention is not the judge, it shouldn't be determinative. What happens in our communities, the inspiration that these student survivors have provided, that's what's going to help guide us in the weeks and months ahead through the election and into real change in our gun laws.
Congressman, we have an election coming up in November. Do you have any reason to believe that the gun control issue will be material in any of the districts across the country?
Yeah, I do. And here's why. There are now high school kids who will be voting for the first time in cities around the country who have never been political, for whom this has now become a defining issue. They will vote in a midterm election, which is very rare to begin with for young voters. They're going to vote, and they're going to vote based on whether the candidate supports protecting them and their family members, or whether they're standing with the gun companies. It's true for those first-time voters, and it's true for the parents of the 17-year-olds and 14-year-olds who have been energized, who will also vote based on this issue. We've created single-issue voters coming out of this tragedy. They're going to help turn things around.